And then my mom asked her, "Are you feeling angry?" And the student responded, "Don't tell me how I'm feeling." So for example, let's say I'm driving down the road and someone cuts me off and I say, "What in the world? Why'd you cut me off? You're a terrible driver." So immediately I'm passing judgment on the person, right?
But if I was to take a devil's advocate position here, I'd say, well, what's so bad about judgment?
There's so much power in the power of one, right? So you can do a lot by being honest about your feelings and needs, even when someone is not being open or kind about theirs.
And I have heard people in church spheres say that they're really discerning people, but they're actually quite judgmental towards people.
Lots of times the judgment comes out of fear, hopelessness, anger, an unmet need. I think it's definite denial of responsibility for like, okay, what can you control? And then I also think it's misplaced emotions.
Today we are joined by Counsellor Kristen Martinez, all the way from California. So Kristen, it's great to have you on. Before we get into the topic, do you want to tell us what inspired you to become a counsellor in the first place?
Yeah, I'd love to. Honestly, I think it was probably from hardship in my own life. When I was 17, my parents got a divorce, and I tried out a lot of different counselors. And I liked some and I didn't like others. And I thought, wow, I've gleaned all these different tools and ways that I would like to approach people. So I think that's the main thing. And then I had the opportunity to get my degree in elementary education. And after working with kids and families, I thought, wow, it'd be great to get to the heart of problems. And so I got my master's while I was working as a teacher, as an elementary teacher. And then it kind of just took off from there, and I quit that job and just focused on counseling and my own kids.
So what is your counseling sort of life look like these days? Is it clinical practice, other stuff?
It's very part-time, but yeah, it's private practice. And I do all of my sessions online, and I meet with maybe 3 to 10 clients a week. So yeah, very part-time, but I love it. It's fun to see people make these positive changes in their lives.
You mentioned that when you were doing counselling, there were some things that you liked and some things that you didn't like. And I feel like some people, when they go see a counsellor, they either have a good experience or they have a bad experience. And if they have a bad experience, they kind of just cut it off and just kind of say, that's not really for me, that's not my thing. What were some of those things that you found were good things or bad things when you were going through that?
That's a good question. I think the good things were giving practical tools. There were a couple counselors that I saw that wouldn't give any kind of growth work in between our sessions. And it seemed like it was just focused on talk therapy. And there's a place and time for that. But if you're not focused on retraining your brain and changing some of those thought patterns and behaviors, it's hard to make lasting changes. So I'd say that's one of the huge positives, and then negatives for other counselors that didn't include that.
So what you mean, I can't go to a counselling session and they're just going to fix me in that 60 minutes? Seems like a ripoff.
Well, you can think whatever you want, but I don't know what kind of benefits you'll get from it. That's for you to decide.
So, Kristen, we're talking today about non-violent communication. And when I first encountered this in your article, it was the first time I'd been introduced to the concept before. And the first question I had in my mind is, how are words violent, or how can communication be violent? If the aim is to be non-violent in our communication, how in the world can communication be violent in the first place? It just kind of didn't make sense to me.
That's a really good question. And I think that's kind of a trip up or roadblock that a lot of people experience when they hear the word nonviolent communication. Some people who have experienced violence in their lives, maybe some kind of physical violence or any kind of trauma related to that, they can kind of shut down hearing that. Or they could be on the flip side of, well, I don't speak violently to people, so this is not for me, and kind of shut down again. So basically, nonviolent communication would be non-judgmental communication. And because of that phrase, violent communication, when I've done workshops with my mom, actually, we've changed the phrasing to non-judgmental. And it's easier for people to be more open and interested in the communication at that point, I think.
I think that's a helpful distinguisher there, like from non-violent to non-judgmental. Is it more so for someone who is on the receiver end or on the other end? Because I guess it's easy for us to change how we communicate, but what about when someone on the other side isn't communicating in the same way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the cool thing about nonviolent communication or non-judgmental communication is that there's so much power in the power of one, right? So you can do a lot by being honest about your feelings and needs, even when someone is not being open or kind about theirs. And then you can also kind of speak life into them by acknowledging, hey, you know, what's going on for you? Are you frustrated about this? And just by guessing what their emotion could be, restating what they're saying to you and making an observation, it can really de-escalate the situation, where they're actually more open to a compassionate communication. And so I think it's pretty powerful how our own compassion and kindness can be contagious to people, even when maybe they come on strong and are really frustrated or there's a serious conflict.
So I get the sense we're going to talk a lot about judgment in this conversation. So could we take a step back maybe and really define perhaps, or really dig into what judgment is? Because I don't want to be, an opposition or anything like that. But if I was to take a devil's advocate position here, I'd say, well, what's so bad about judgment? Isn't judgment necessary for human growth, for human development? Isn't judgment necessary for, me knowing what I stand for and what I stand against, perhaps? Is it not good for determining what's good and what's bad, or what's healthy or what's unhealthy? What's wrong with judgment?
That's a good point. And I do want to clarify, I think discernment is different than judgment, and it's important to have discernment. And I also want to clarify that this is far from moral relativism, right? So there's clear good and bad. But when we're focusing on passing a judgment opposed to making an observation about someone or some situation, we've already made up in our mind how we think or feel about that person or situation. So we're going to treat them accordingly. So in his book, Nonviolent Communication is written by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, and he explains how the Nazis actually used a term called Amtssprach, which means office talk. And they were able to say, oh, we're doing these things because this is for work. So it was a total denial of responsibility, because they had to do it, right? It was for work. And so we can treat people accordingly because we're not held responsible in this situation.
So, sorry, things for work, like what? Anti-Semitic, like talk or action? What sort of things is it that they were doing that they defined as Amtssprach?
Basically, anything in the war that was anti-Semitic. Or against other people.
So the higher purpose was the German Reich, the good of the German homeland, the whole Nazi ideology. It was a way of relegating responsibility or relegating objectionable behavior to be in service of the higher good. Am I kind of getting that? Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely it. And obviously that's one extreme. But even saying something like, I work in an office and I'm going to turn in this paper because I have to. Well, why do you have to? Well, I'm going to lose my job. That's still a type of denial of responsibility. You have a choice. You can choose to be at your job or you can choose not to be at your job. You can choose to do the paper and not do the paper. So the more that we're taking responsibility and the more that we're focusing on observations opposed to judgments, the more freedom we will have to connect compassionately with people. So, for example, let's say I'm driving in a car down the road and someone cuts me off, and I say, "What in the world? Why'd you cut me off? You're a terrible driver." So, immediately I'm passing judgment on the person, right? Because they cut me off. And then I can say that they're a terrible driver. So if you actually focus on the feeling and need and make an observation, well, the observation would be their car drove right in front of mine. So I'm not even saying they cut me off, which seems silly and nitpicky, but it changes your brain. So their car drove right in front of mine. How do I feel? I'm terrified, I'm angry, I'm furious, livid, all of those emotions. And what do I need? Well, I need safety for me and my family. And by focusing on that, what I'm feeling and needing, I'm not placing blame on the other person that they're a terrible driver or whatever is going on for them. I'm just focusing on my specific needs, which may mean I need to slow down and be far away from that car to get my need met of safety.
Yeah, it sort of comes down to not assuming things that you can't confirm or clarify, I suppose. Versus just making snap judgments. I have heard this quote. It said something like, people are led to believe by criticizing or judging that they are discerning. And I have heard people sort of in church spheres say that they're really discerning people, but they're actually, from an outsider's point of view, quite judgmental towards people. But I think that's something that, you know, sometimes people think that is like a good thing they're doing because, like you mentioned, Jessie, like we need that in order for society to be a certain way. But how do we kind of change that in our brains to becoming judgmental to what you're talking about?
How do we change to more of an observation focus? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because I feel like we're not intentionally being judgmental. Like it's kind of like we think we're doing the right thing, or we think we're pulling people up for their back.
Exactly. Well, it's a really hard thing to do. And one thing about NVC is I like the way that it's broken down into a very manageable, theoretically doable set of steps. So the first step would be make an observation. Step 2 would be identify your feelings. Step 3, identify your needs. And then step 4, make a request. So I think the very first thing, if all of us were able to just focus on making that observation, so we're not actually assigning a value or good or bad to something, we're just stating what we see. We're gonna share the facts, and we're not gonna put people on the defense, because immediately when there's a judgment passed, if we're trying to share with someone, they immediately get on the defense, right?
So if I'm just trying to tease this out in my brain, because I'm really interested in why we do this. I think you've alluded to this a few times, but I just want to make sure that I'm getting it right. When we make a judgment on somebody, when we say, I think using the article, the example of, oh, that kid's naughty because they're doing a behavior that we perceive to be, non-helpful, or that person's an idiot because they cut you off in the car. Is that a way of us compartmentalizing the world around us so that we can feel good about ourselves, that we aren't that person and that the people around us are the problem? Therefore, we feel like we're not the ones at fault, but other people are, and they need to get themselves sorted out. Is that part of what's going on? Is it a defensive mechanism?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definite denial of responsibility for okay, what can you control? And then I also think it's misplaced emotions. So many people, if you give them the task of identify as many emotions as you can think of, I think it was Brene Brown, she said the average person can identify maybe 5 to 10 emotions. And because of our lack of emotional vocabulary and awareness, I think that lots of times the judgment comes out of fear, hopelessness, anger, something that an unmet need that that they don't recognize that they have. And they can't even verbalize what their emotion is. So it's a lot easier to blame someone than focus on your own emotion.
So, for instance, if I'm playing out the scenario that you use in the article, seeing a kid that you say, okay, a judgment might sound like there's a naughty kid yelling and running wildly away from his parents. The need may be that, you know, maybe there's something inside me that is disturbed or offended by a child that has more to do with me than the child itself. So there's some sort of need or some sort of trauma or some sort of, you know, unmet emotional situation inside myself that's been triggered, not to use a kind of a blasé term, by that particular situation.
Exactly. Yeah. And it can be something as simple as, wow, I'm uncomfortable with the situation and I'd like that child to respect their parents. So respect is a basic human need. Or, oh, wow, I'm really scared because that kid could run into the street and get hurt. So I want safety for that kid, which is another basic human need. So it's really simple things. And again, it could be connected to trauma from the past. But a lot of times it's just a need that we, like I said, we don't recognize that we have. And yeah, it's easier to place that blame.
Yeah, simple, but probably takes practice to get that happening as a natural reaction in your brain. You mentioned needs just there as one of the 4 steps. You said, I think you observe, identify feelings, recognize needs, and make requests. And I feel like a lot of people, you know, they have feelings, like you said, they can't always describe them very well, or they don't have that emotional vocabulary. But I feel like a lot of people also struggle to know what they need. Do you have any advice on like how to figure that out when people are already overwhelmed by the emotional labeling kind of part?
Yes, I do. I have a handout and a list of basic human needs that's actually found in the book. So Dr. Rosenberg worked with another professional to break down all of our basic needs into 7 categories, and then each category has more specifics. And especially as you are not used to the terminology, it's helpful to just have that list and put it on your fridge. And that being said, it's also important to probably practice it a lot yourself and not just tell someone else to go look at the fridge, because I am guilty of doing that with my husband. After I read Nonviolent Communication, I was thrilled about it. I put my emotions and the needs list on the fridge, and my husband and I were in the middle of an argument, and I said, "What do you need? What do you need? What is your need?" I don't know what that means. I don't even know how to answer you. Well, look at the list. And obviously none of that is non-judgmental communication. And so I think just approaching it gently and offering yourself compassion, because creating new pathways in your brain takes a lot of time, especially if the pathway is dug deep, you know, it's really hard.
For your husband who, I think it was your husband who said he didn't know what he needed, what do you do once you get to that point where you're like, I actually don't know what I need?
Yeah, then I would consult the list. And even if you don't have a list of the needs, if you're able to kind of dissect what's going on, lots of things can come down to connection, respect, understanding, kindness, safety. I would say those are probably the 5 main needs that we have again and again. And also validation. So in a lot of communication challenges that my husband and I have had, he usually needs some kind of validation or understanding. And I usually need some type of listening and affirmation. And so I think if you're able to study the needs or consult the book, it's so helpful to just cut a conflict in half, as far as the time it takes to resolve it, because truly, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but you can go around and around with communication and think, if they just knew what I was trying to say, if they just understood, then they would see my point and everything would be fine, right? And when both people are thinking that, it's just this fear dance. And when you stop and pause and recognize, oh, wow, okay, all you want is respect. All you're wanting is understanding and support. Okay, we can both give each other that, even without agreeing with whatever we're talking about.
I think I'm slightly cynical about human nature. So
Yeah.
please help me find a better way here. But in my experience, I've often just seen that people are unwilling to make that step, to step outside of their own need, even if that need is completely unrecognized and unarticulated, to actually consider the needs of other people. And I mean, I put myself in that category as well. All of this sounds great. Like, this is stuff that I think, man, I should be doing this more because my relationships would be so much better. But how do you step outside that, not just like once, but how do you actually start to make that the default rather than just wanting to, be able to articulate, this is what I want, and completely ignore the needs of the people around you that you are conflicting with?
So to stop in the moment and actually begin to make those changes, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, and also,
Like
but also
when you're
to shift, because this is our default, the selfish sort of part of ourselves that just wants to be heard and for our need to be met. But it seems really difficult, at least from where I'm sitting, to shift that default to be not just being able to articulate what I want, but also be able to make the question or ask the question of, well, what is it that you need, or trying to perceive that.
Well, I think one of the steps that can be really helpful is setting some ground rules in your relationships and sticking with that. And one of the ground rules that I recently learned and absolutely love but have trouble practicing is, if you notice the situation escalating, if you're over a 3 on the emotion scale, then stop and come back to it when you are both below a 3. For some of my clients, I've had them set their smartwatches and for a certain heart rate range that is unsafe, and your heart rate will match that fury, right? That stress response. And so if you guys like set your watches and it starts beeping, then take a break.
Tap out.
and then come back to it when you're calmer. Again, that is so hard to do. And another way that can help calm your nervous system is offering self-compassion, which I kind of mentioned. And that would be simply saying what you wish a friend would say to you in the moment. It doesn't mean, oh, you're okay, because you're not. You're pissed, or you're frustrated, or you're really sad or devastated, whatever. But it would mean, hey, and I actually speak to myself in third person. So I'd say, hey, Kristen, I'm really sorry that this is a frustrating situation. You're not getting the support and the help that you need right now. And it's like pressing a dopamine button in your brain, and it helps you calm down for a moment. And when you offer yourself compassion, then you can begin to extend that compassion to other people. And I know it's hard to believe, but there's a whole book on that too. Especially, actually, no, I'm not going to say that. That would be a judgment. Sorry, I just want to clarify though. Does that give you any kind of hope, or because I understand it's totally normal to be cynical.
Yeah. Well,
and
I mean, this is, I think, part of the work that needs to be done in counseling situations. But I mean, it's great that it's open for people to, to try it. You don't necessarily have to, but it definitely sounds like the sort of thing that would be hard work. And that's probably, a good thing.
Yeah. And I think depending on what you need to be convinced that it's going to work, and okay, I'm going to practice this, then when you start to see relationships transformed, it's mind-blowing. It truly is. When my husband finally got it, I did a presentation at his work, and he finally understood it because I had practiced my speech and I wasn't triggered, you know. Um, and he said, "Oh my goodness, this is amazing. I'm going to use this." And he works at an orthodontic office. He manages, and he gets a lot of patients that are unhappy and frustrated, and he handles them every week with grace and ease. And he comes home thrilled to say, "Guess what I NVC'd today?" And a patient can be at a 10, and within 5 or 10 minutes of my husband just repeating back what he heard them say and what they're frustrated about and kind of guessing maybe some emotions if they're not sharing them directly, the patient usually ends the conversation content and happy. And it doesn't mean that they always receive some kind of huge perk or change or even what they're wanting, but they are getting the listening and understanding that they need.
I really like that level 3 rule that you just gave us. But at the same time, I feel like sometimes people, even before going into a conversation about whatever is causing the conflict, they're already at that 3 because of the anxiety that bringing up that conversation kind of brings. So I can also see how it would maybe stop someone from ever stepping into that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's where maybe grounding techniques would come in, like practice deep breathing or tapping or any kind of coping mechanism that you like to calm yourself and calm that nervous system before you enter the conversation. But yeah, that is a really good point.
Yeah, I think another thing I'm hearing you saying is that it's something that you've got to diligently kind of practice in your relationships.
Yes.
Because I think just before you sent us this article, I'd actually had someone suggest this book to me, which was ironic, but and I tried to implement it and I felt like I was acting and I was like, oh, I don't know about this. Like, this just feels really unnatural. I feel like it seems kind of fake. So does it also have to be kind of like a heart posture thing versus just a practical tool?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think God's spirit changes our hearts along with our brains as we focus on it, you know, and we're surrendering our will to his. I think the cool part is it's actually the way that Christ wants to connect with us in a loving, non-judgmental way, and the way he connected with all of the people he interacted with. But you're right about it being like a foreign language. And that is one thing my husband said again and again, no one talks like this. And so you have to make it your own because you don't want it to come across sounding fake, right? And disingenuine. So it's really important to find how can I share this? What kind of verbiage would work for me and still say what I'm wanting to do? And ChatGPT is a pretty good friend with that. You can just say NVC this and done.
No way.
So you lead us through a 4-step process in the article of just something that you can run through if you're having trouble. Observation, feelings, needs, and request. I thought it might be helpful for the purposes of this conversation, maybe if you want to run us through if you're stuck in a situation where you're really trying, you really want to be able to respond positively to a particularly challenging situation. How can this process help to get a positive result out of it?
So that's actually an interesting thing that I would like to clarify. The goal of NVC is not a positive result.
Ooh.
The goal is compassionate communication.
Okay.
So when we're entering into a conversation, trying to get our agenda passed or a positive result, then it wouldn't be non-judgmental communication.
Okay. So we have to leave the agenda at home.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which is nearly impossible, right? That's why it has to be a God thing too.
Okay.
But it's cool. I will say this, and just to commiserate, Danita, I've tried it for years and years. Probably, I think it was maybe 2.5 years ago when I read the book. And then we've done lots of workshops and presentations since then. And even though I try to practice it every day with my kids, there are times when obviously it doesn't work. But it's recognizing that you can have a do-over, and that's where repaired relationships happen. And I can come back to my kids and say, wow, I'm so sorry that I reacted that way and that I spoke to you that way. That's not what I want to do. I wish this, this, and this. And then we talk about their feelings and needs, and then I share mine. And so I think it's helpful also to recognize that there can be do-overs, and that relationships can still be repaired if you don't do it the NBC way the first time.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Can we break down a few of those? Where did that article just go? Like, out of the observation, feelings, needs, and requests, is there typically one that is more difficult for people to put into practice?
Probably observations. Because we just have this knee-jerk reaction, right, that passes judgment. And so reframing that to, okay, let me just focus on the facts before I open my mouth and share something.
So we've looked at a few examples. We've looked at the child at the park, and you've shared some that you and your partner have experienced. Just to kind of cement this idea and this practice more in our heads, can we run through another example?
Yeah, definitely. My mom was a professor for a couple of years, and she had an encounter with a student, and the student was really angry after receiving a low grade from a paper. So my mom had sent out a very clear rubric about the expectations, and the student's expectations did not meet the requirement for an A. And the student was really frustrated. So do you guys want to go through the steps? Do you want to share what's your observation?
Ooh, that could be fun. Let's do it.
From the student's perspective? Or
from my mom's perspective.
Okay. I guess the observation would be that a student has not got the grades they wanted, and they are frustrated about that.
Excellent. Anything
Sure.
else?
I mean, from your mum's perspective, the student really hasn't listened to what's required of them for the assignment. And so, what do you expect?
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe reframe that first part. The student didn't listen.
Okay.
But that would be a temptation,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
To say
Sorry,
that.
I shouldn't choose the toxic route.
Okay, so my mom was confused and irritated, and she started talking to the student. So she scheduled a time to meet with the student, and the student went on and on about the frustration with her grade. And my mom was trying to guess what the student was feeling. So it's kind of clear what was my mom feeling.
Oh, what was your mum feeling? Maybe a bit attacked.
Oh, I'm so glad that you said that. So attacked is a word that is on the not actual feelings list.
Ooh,
so a
okay.
lot of people will say words like attacked or betrayed, coerced, any type of word that we use as a feeling that actually puts blame on another person is going to make matters more intense, right?
Yeah.
So how could you reframe that to making it more about my mom?
Ooh,
Maybe that. It's got to be about feelings.
Yeah.
Feeling maybe that the student's not listening or isn't paying attention enough to value working within the guidelines that has been given. That might be a little bit too much.
But those would still be saying something about the student,
Yeah.
right? That the student's not listening and not following. So just emotions. Do you think my mom was frustrated, irritated, confused, exacerbated, excited.
Confused.
Frustrated, I'm sure, certainly as well.
Yeah, frustrated and confused.
Yes, both of those.
Okay.
She was frustrated and she was also confused, right? Because she had shared really clear guidelines with that student. And then maybe we can kind of NBC both sides. What do you think the student was feeling?
Again, quite frustrated,
Yeah.
Angry,
I would
I mean, I'm sure.
disappointed.
Yeah, angry, frustrated, disappointing. Yeah, all of the above. And the student started saying, you're saying I'm a loser. You're saying I'm not good enough.
Oh.
And my mom had just clarified that she hadn't met the requirements in the rubric for an A. And she said, I'm the worst. So what do you think she's feeling now?
Your mum
This
or the
The
student?
student.
Just like despondent and hopeless and
Good words.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then my mom asked her, are you feeling angry? And the student responded, don't tell me how I'm feeling.
Ooh.
And so my mom kept trying to clarify how she was feeling. So we're still at step 2, right? We did the observation. We're trying to identify feelings, but this is where it can get tricky because a lot of times if people are not wanting to hear you guess what they're feeling, they can get defensive and more angry. And it can be tempting to kind of just take a step back and be done. But in this instance, my mom kept clarifying what she thought she was feeling. So what she thought her student was feeling. And she kept restating what she heard the student say. So it can be really helpful just restating what you hear.
So I guess before we move on to the next step, it's important then to clarify, because I feel like if you went from observation to identifying feelings, you could be completely wrong with what you're assuming other people's feelings to be.
Yeah.
So it's like a really important step there to actually clarify with the other person
Yeah.
what it is they're feeling.
Yeah, and it can be confusing, right? Because if the tone of voice and someone raises and someone's yelling at you, it would make sense that they're angry. But it's also okay for them to say they're not angry, right?
Yeah.
And that could have something to do with their unmet need. So we can move on to the need now. And this lady kept stating a judgment that she thought my mom was making about her when my mom would ask, are you feeling this? And my mom came to the point where she was flabbergasted, but she kept trying. And she said, I really want to know what's going on for you. So do you guys have any guesses what the student may have been feeling? Sorry. Do you have any guesses what the student may have been needing?
Probably clarification on why she got that mark or where she missed learning that.
Yeah. I
Okay.
think from what it sounds like, perhaps she needed reassurance that she's not a bad student necessarily. It's just that the work that she produced may have been good under different circumstances, but it just so happened that it wasn't under these specific circumstances.
So maybe some kind of, validation, reassurance, understanding. So as my mom kept restating what she was feeling and showing her compassion, it came out that this student 6 months prior had been in an accident and she had a severe brain injury in that accident. And because my mom was able to continue offering that compassionate connection, she felt safe enough to share that with her and share that trauma that she had experienced. And then the student calmed down and they ended the phone call. So it wasn't 100% clear what the student was needing. Maybe it was a mixture of safety, understanding, like you guys said, validation, affirmation that she is a capable, smart person. This one grade or paper doesn't affect who she is and where her value comes from. And it was really interesting as the student calmed down, She was so happy, in fact, that as they ended the phone call, she told my mom that she loved her.
That is quite the spectrum
So-
of emotions.
Yeah.
It is, right? It's wild.
Yeah.
And I know it is hard to believe, but even reading the book, Zanita, what did you think of Dr. Rosenberg's stories about how he de-escalated situations?
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. I guess my tendency is just to be a little skeptical as to will it really work out like this? Like you mentioned earlier, that the goal is not to resolve conflict, it's to have compassionate communication. So yeah, I guess it's just like, oh yeah, obviously in books they use the best examples, but how is this going to play out in my own life?
Yeah. And he has, that's a really good point, and he has some really rich stories. He would do marriage workshops, and he would say, I'd like the couple with the longest standing fight to come up. And I guarantee you that within 20 minutes of both of you identifying each other's feelings and needs clearly, that this fight will be resolved. And people would say, whatever, we've had a 30-year argument. This is not going to fix anything. And in order to get them to understand each other's feelings and needs, that could take hours. But once they truly understood that, it takes minutes. It's pretty cool.
I love how you, at the end of the article, quote Ephesians 4, verse 15, a verse that a lot of Christians will know, but I suspect few Christians have really dug into practicing it and figuring out exactly what it means for them, which is speak the truth in love. And oftentimes we tend to err on one side or the other of either speaking too much truth or speaking too much love. But it seems like you believe that tension of those two values is really key to practicing nonviolent communication.
Yes, 100%. I think it needs to be honest and open, so the truth has to be there, but then it has to be surrounded in love as well. And I also just want to point out that, again, when you're practicing nonviolent communication, it doesn't mean scenarios will always go well. And it doesn't mean that we have a lack of boundaries because we want to compassionately communicate. Good boundaries are like good fences, right? We need to protect what we have and who's within our gates. And it's important to set those boundaries in a kind and loving way. And that's actually the most respectful way that you can treat a person, by working within the realm of boundaries and what you can give and what you can't give.
Yeah, I think the words that stand out for me from this conversation is compassionate and curious. So maybe if we could just channel those in our mind and take them in our interactions, it would help us.
I love that. And it's funny that you said that, because I've found if I'm not curious in the situation, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to say it. I'm curious about blah, blah, blah. And it kind of forces me to be curious. It's like, okay, yeah, I actually do want to know about it. And it's such a great approach, because how many people are furious with you when you start off, hey, I'm curious about this. It's just an open invitation to share what's on your heart.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you feel like we haven't addressed or spoken about?
I would just like to reiterate that it does take time and effort to put any new thing into practice. And again, to pour on the compassion to yourself and others.
All right. Well, it has been a delight to talk to you. Thank you for informing us on how to communicate better. For anyone who wants to read Kristen's article, it is in the October issue and it is called From Judgment to Connection. And you can also find that on our website as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been, really good to pick your brain.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting.